Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show. I'm your host, Adrian Evans, and I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Willem. Willem, hi, how are you?
Good to meet you, Adrian, and thank you for having me on the show this morning.
Well, absolutely my pleasure. And I know we've been trying to get this one in the diary for a while, and given your hectic schedule of travel, I'm absolutely delighted we managed to do that today. So, welcome to the show. And I wonder if you could start just by giving us some background on your career and what you do today.
Yes, absolutely. Would be delighted to. So I took a bit of an unconventional route to becoming what I am today. So I studied law, which is a university course for 3 years that I did. But I then decided to go into the bar, become a barrister. I had the wonderful opportunity of experiencing everything that goes on in court and chambers, but there was something that felt for me that I was missing,
Okay.
and that was I wanted to see more of what actually happened, not just a snapshot in time. And I had the wonderful experience of then my mentor, who was the general counsel for the TV company called Channel 5 at that time, but now 5 TV. Um, and a wonderful experience that led me to experience what in-house life was. And I then was very lucky, and obviously through a lot of hard work and a lot of applications that went in to find myself going in-house at Toyota Financial Services, and then effectively learned A to Z of what it means to become a lawyer in-house, but also the wonderful hybrid of what then became compliance, because compliance was taking a bigger stance and role within the industry at that point, and this was happening when things like consumer credit was changing, insurance was changing, so going back a while now. Um, and as a result, just evolved my career in becoming legal and compliance counsel, as well as then taking head of regulatory compliance roles. And then, after about 12 years of working in big corporate, I decided it was a bit of a change. The industry had been very kind to me. I was able to contribute an awful lot to industry through publications,
Okay.
working with regulators to try and influence policy, but also an appointment at the trade association, which allowed me to really work with the members in the industry to evolve practice. And a lot happened during that time. And therefore, I felt I needed to also give back.
Yeah.
So I had the wonderful opportunity to mentor some early stage startups, then became a mentor on the Techstars program, which was a kind of a powered by Barclays accelerator at the time, and did about 5 or 6 cohorts. And it was lovely, just really wonderful experience. And then around about 2015-16, co-founded a business called ShieldPay. And look at where we are now here. Fintech experience for over 15 years, and here now at EconPay for almost the last 3.
Excellent, excellent. I love that journey because it's so, dare I say, squiggly. Yep. And I think it just shows that it's not about necessarily just having a linear career. So,
Absolutely, and that's why I say it's an unconventional one, because
mm,
it's a lot by being inquisitive and curious in mind, and not being afraid, and taking the grit to not always having to go up the corporate ladder, is also
yeah,
being able to challenge yourself. Well, I want to do something new, and I'll be very honest. When I hit the payments sector, yes, I had touched on payments throughout my career, but then when I delved deep into payments around ShieldPay time, that was the first real primary experience around payments. And yeah, it was an eye opener, but lovely space to be in. I think it's such a dynamic sphere.
mm,
Payments is, and it's always evolving, always changing. There's a lot of innovation that still happens around that space, and that keeps me very entertained in it.
excellent, excellent. I'm sure it's gonna be a running theme, I'm sure, about curiosity and innovation and also the people, I think, in payments is gonna be fascinating. So I wonder if you could just share about how do you go about leading? I mean, the leading in terms of the organization, the people, the partners, and we know across the payments industry, everything's about collaboration. You can't do anything in the payments industry on your own. So tell me about how you lead.
Well, I think you've just hit the nail on the head by the word collaboration. It is very much a collaborative effort because you're not just the single point in payments. It's a complex web of technical frameworks and networks. So I think you've got to that collaborative effort is
Mm,
a real focused one. But in terms of how I lead, and I think this is kind of where I see this not only in my team, but just I think people of a similar mindset, you've got to be clear and resolute in what your vision and mission is.
mm,
So if you are able to define what your purpose is about, then I think it's a lot easier because if you lead with no purpose, I think it becomes a bit of a
yeah.
scattergun approach of what you're actually trying to do. And I would say EconPay's vision and mission is very clear, and that allows us to then kind of focus what we want to do. And as a leader, then it's about discipline and structure,
Mm,
and being able to push the boat. Never be happy with status quo. Challenge your team day in day out to be that 1% better. That's how I approach things, and never be afraid to challenge and with
mhm,
curiosity and but at the same time keeping it always focused on what we've got to do as part of our mission and our vision to bring customers to life, to make sure that they are able to process payments in a very resilient manner, that we can globally expand in a resilient and sustainable manner that
mm,
supports our customers throughout the entire payments ecosystem. And that's really how we
mm,
need to go about it. But at the front and foremost, it's about finding purpose. Then it's secondly having discipline and structure,
mm,
and then it comes down to really rock solid communication. Because if you
mm,
can't communicate with your team, how would you expect your team to be able to pull things together?
mm,
And that's a really fundamental piece of it all, is good, solid, and clear communication. And then it's also finding people who are willing to be on that journey. And
yeah.
that's the other thing. If you have
Mm.
people who don't want to be on that journey, you're never being able to set yourself apart in this world. And I think that's a very critical part. So it's like I said, it's a very interconnected piece of how you drive things forward.
So just so I can understand then, in terms of the econ pay vision, what is the econ pay vision in terms of kind of simplicity and removing complexity, etc. But tell us a little bit about more about that.
As well, ultimately it's three simple words. It's ultimate financial inclusivity. Now, how we look at that is very much of, well, we have obviously our merchants. Our merchants are a vital component of our lifeblood, and we recognize that. But we then need to look beyond that. So the merchants need to be able to power their payments ecosystem with the most trusted and varied payment methods that suit their customers. So we then look beyond that. So what works for the merchant may not necessarily work for their customers. So it's understanding what makes the customers that of the merchants make payments in the most seamless, most trusted manner. And we've done a lot of research around this internally. So, the statistics are almost that 50% of people will only pay with a payment method that they trust.
Absolutely.
So if you have customers who are in let's say Latin America, they will know what payment methods they trust. They may not necessarily wish to pay by card that's powered by Visa or MasterCard. They may want to have an account to account payment transfer that they have deal with day to day. So obviously, as part of our role, it's being able to recognize that on behalf of the merchants and being able to allow them to adopt payment methods that people are willing to pay with. And that's what we mean by ultimate financial inclusivity. And that creates that interconnectedness in the entire payment ecosystem so that people feel free to make a payment with whichever method they want. But for us, inclusivity goes beyond just that. It actually, we also look at inclusivity of people who are not served well by the traditional payment systems. And
Mm,
what do we mean by that? Actually, is a significant population who suffer from certain disabilities who cannot make payments online. So we're quite almost obsessed with this, where we do
mm,
look at how could someone, for example, with a color blindness or particular disabilities, how could they make a payment
mm.
online in the most accessible way? And we even have our systems tested. We are on different programs to look at accessibility. We test
Mm.
ourselves on the way the design goes to the colors. So we're really obsessed by that. And that's how we look at
Yeah.
inclusivity as a whole. And that's what drives us day in, day out. But fundamentally is to allow the most optimal payment solutions for our customers.
It's so interesting to see that from an accessibility perspective, because until something happens to you or somebody you know. So unfortunately, I lost quite a lot of my sight a number of years ago. And I remember being at a client meeting and then just being handed a terminal, and it was literally white buttons to press and on a white background, on a grey background.
Yeah.
And it was total guesswork. It was total guesswork. And I was like, I remember just thinking, it's quite embarrassing, in front of a client just trying to do that. And then I couldn't believe it. But the next time I went to the same hotel and they got a different terminal. And unsurprisingly, it was white buttons or whites on black. And something's really simple, but again, that made a huge difference. I was able to pay. Yeah.
Well, it's actually a staggering figure if you stand by it. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term the purple pound, but effectively the purple pound looks at the annual spending of disabled households in the
Mm,
UK. And in 2026 alone, that figure is a staggering 446 million pounds. So imagine a way in which you could actually allow people who suffer those disabilities to access payment solutions that work for them. That to me is a greater meaning of being able to help people who traditionally are underserviced, but also it opens up opportunities not only for your merchants but also the payment solutions to be able to build an ecosystem that really truly works, and
absolutely.
also build revenue. But yeah, that's part and parcel of what drives a successful business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So looking broader now, when we look at the payments, you mentioned innovation at the start of the conversation, and again, there's almost so much innovation in the payments industry. It's hard to keep up. Um, and we start with a relatively simple business model and now or ecosystem model, and now that's evolved. But if I was to ask you, what's the one opportunity in the payments industry that excites you the most and you think is actually going to really point the direction over the next 18 months to 2 years?
Oh, just one. I can think of many at the
Okay, you can have
moment.
two. You can have two.
Okay, I'll have two. I'll have two. Well, I think we would be remiss to say that obviously embedded finance, open banking would be right up
Yeah,
the list there of continued innovation. And I'll touch upon that in a little bit as to why. That's my second
great.
choice. My first choice would be an area in which in the UK there's a lot of focus on developing the regulatory framework for it, which is about stablecoins.
Yeah,
So I know that crypto has had a bad reputation in many sense of the form, but there is also the true essence of what e-money was, is effectively being able to transfer funds almost instantly within a closed loop system that is actually really robust and secure,
yeah, yeah.
and more importantly, real time. And this is where I think stablecoin is an interesting development of innovation. So obviously it's been around for a while, but a lot of people have really looked at this as a form of investment. And for me, stablecoin is actually a form of currency that makes payments work a lot more seamless with an interoperability that hopefully would be globalized in a way that we don't have the same challenges as we experience today. And what I mean by that is imagine a situation where you don't have to have funds cleared through the correspondent banking networks, and it would take 3 or 4 days to have your funds land. Instead, this would land instantly, and you would be able to use stablecoin instantly in a payments network. So you would have immediate, traceable liquidity.
Yeah.
And recognized by obviously pegged currency. Um, and I think that's an exciting area of where payments is going. And I'll tell you my honest opinion why is because consumer expectations demanded of us.
Mm.
So yes, I mentioned this on occasions in conferences from time to time, but 20 years ago, it was okay to wait 2 or 3 days to have an Amazon package delivered to my door. I was happy to pay for postage. Those days are long gone. I want it the same day, and I don't wish to pay for it. So, the optimization and the logistics
Mm.
needed for that, in order for a business to be sustainable, resilient, and profitable, you've got to find the most optimal ways of being able to power that. And I think stablecoin is one of those ways in which you could satisfy that instant demand of where the consumers are going. And then the second point is, the ongoing innovation around open finance and
Mm.
embedded finance. Um, and I do think we do need to build upon our sovereignty as in the payment systems. We've now recently seen, of course, the growth of Wero, which is the new payment systems in Europe, which is designed to become a little bit more sovereign, replace some of the existing payments ecosystems that there are there. But it effectively reduces reliance on particular card schemes. I mean, it's staggering to think that about 80 to 90% of global payments go through a few card schemes networks. Imagine a situation when a leader would have to say, switch it off. Then I think you would have a global crisis. So
Yeah,
building
indeed.
so building a sovereignty around your payments ecosystem, for example, account to account and open finance, embedded finance, I think that's where really the second wave of innovation is coming.
Yeah, it's fascinating what you say about stablecoin because I think I've always viewed that as a currency rather than as an open market thing to be traded as an investment. And I think that unfortunately that's what's given that or framed that not as effective. But obviously, I think trying to the implications here for cross-border payment is huge because I'm always stunned, and it was interesting. I was from a leading global bank. I was speaking to a somebody who was head of embedded finance, and he said to me, a parcel from one side of the globe to the other is more trackable by various things than what money is. And still to this day, money, there's this sort of black hole. You know, a client tells you they've paid you, there's this black hole, and then it either appears, and then your bank a couple of days later tell you it's appeared. That's just like, that's just not the world we're experiencing. If we could reduce friction but increase transparency, I think that's only going to meet consumer expectations more effectively and business expectations.
Yes. Yes, and not only that, it helps us actually being able to disrupt some of the financial crime that happens globally as
Indeed,
well.
indeed.
I would say that traceability around payments does exist today, but given the complex systems that we all work towards, and it not always being interoperable, that's when it
Mm,
takes just more time to be able to locate the
indeed.
transfers and the journey of funds. I would say cash, on the other hand, is almost impossible to properly trace back. But this is where I think, obviously stablecoin and crypto, especially when it's, publicly on blockchain or DLT systems, that those are completely and 100% traceable. You can
Mm,
trace it from which wallet to which wallet it has gone to. And I think that's really, really important. And with ongoing focus on combating financial crime,
yep.
and the travel rule being overlaid at that whole aspect, I think it's very clear of the traceability of where the funds go. And but more importantly, Adrian, it happens real time, and
Yeah,
that's
indeed.
really what you want.
Yeah,
That's what you want.
absolutely. Yeah, that's what we want. We want real-time payment, don't we?
Exactly.
So I wonder if we can just dig further there into this. That there's possibly an overused term in the payments industry, which is about, and the tech industry generally, which is people talk about being customer centric. So tell me, as somebody leading a business, what does being customer centric actually mean to you, and how do you actually not talk about that, but actually bring that to life with daily actions and behaviors across your team and business?
Well, I think at the root and the core of it all, Adrian, is if you don't have customers, you can't run a business.
Yep.
So your customers are, in that essence, your livelihood, your bloodline. And if you do not know what your customers' preferences are, what they need from a business like us, then you really are struggling to be able to find customers that would support you on your journey as well. So, I mean, at the root cause, they are your livelihood, and that's what I believe. Customer centric. It starts from recognizing that without customers, you can't build a business. Um, and then it's growing and scaling in a way that doesn't lose the essence for why you're operating. And that comes back down to your vision and mission. And then it's being able to tie that all back in on your growth around customers, and never stopping to understand what the needs are. The needs of a customer will always continue to evolve, to develop,
Yeah.
and and certain merchants will have very different expectations. So, and for example, in merchants, some merchants payments are driven by a finance department because they will look at it from a cost-based perspective. Some are delivered through business units because they see payments as a very strategic part. And it's understanding what drives each of those motivations and
Mm,
being able to adapt accordingly towards those different customer expectations, but still bringing it to the essence of what your
yeah.
business is about. That's what drives customer centricity. And then it's challenging yourself in your product and the way you shape your product around that. That's what brings it back down to customer centricity. Um, and then it's effectively building values, because you may not always be the cheapest out there, but if you are bringing added value to a merchant, that's what real
Mm.
true customer centricity is. And that creates partnership, that creates knowledge, and that ultimately is, a loop circle in which you can continue to evolve in.
Yeah. Fascinating, because you've got a reputation for being very curious with how you think, how you lead, how you are, yeah, as a human being. So how do you bring that curiosity to life for your team and for customers? Because that inquisitiveness is the very nature of understanding their needs and continuing to understand those evolving needs.
I think if you stop being curious, you stop being human in many ways, to be honest.
I think that's the
Um,
quote. I think that's the quote of the day.
well, I think uh, if you are not curious,
Mm,
you stop to evolve.
yeah.
And I think it comes back down to the purpose. I think the point is you've
Mm,
always got to understand why you are doing certain things, and test based on why you're doing certain things. Then you start to analyze, well, what is it that I need to do in order to bring that why to life?
yes. Yes.
And then it goes down to, well, how am I going to do that, right? And
Yes.
and and that's where I said earlier, and you've got to challenge yourself to be that 1% better every day, but you've always got to tie it back to what is your eventual
Yes.
purpose for why
Yes.
you're doing it, and
Mm,
and that drives, in my sense, curiosity, because things are evolving at rapid pace. We say, well, it's reinventing something that has existed for many years, but it's still, it is going at pace. And if
mm,
you are not curious enough to understand what's going around in the world around you,
Yeah.
and you're locked into this kind of very siloed world, it never allows you to evolve. So it's important to, well, how I would always say, challenge status quo. If you're happy
Mm.
with status quo, you stop evolving. So you've got
Yes.
to always look at, well, this is what we are today. How does that bring me into a place where I can evolve into tomorrow? But more importantly, where do I get to in 2 to 3, 4 years' time?
Yeah.
Will I still be at a leading perspective of driving our business, or even looking at what we do in
Mm.
compliance or in financial crime? Will that allow me to evolve in a way that could still stand the test of time in that time, right? So, and that automatically drives curiosity.
Yeah.
And the next stage of that is, you may be curious, but it then needs to take action and grit, because not everything will go always to plan, but you've always got to think, I've got to stick with it, right? So, and I think that's one of the things that I would say to my younger self as well, is you've got to be, you've got to have that grit. Never ever lose focus, never lose sight of what you want to get to. But there are different ways in which you can achieve maybe a slice that evolves into something bigger later on down the line.
Yeah, wonderful. It's just I always look sort of for the sort of headline quotes that's going to come out of a conversation, and I think that is the sort of. I hope I got this one right. When you said that if you stop being curious, you stop being human. I couldn't agree more. And one thing I would just say about this channel, which I absolutely adore, is that every single guest who's come on this show, the common word and the common mindset is built around curiosity, which is the very basis of our business with the organizer. So that's wonderful, and I love the other components. Though it needs then to be actioned, and we need to stay the course. Those things are fundamental.
Totally right. And I'll be honest, those are the people I would want in my team any day.
Yes.
So you may not be what I would say the technically most gifted individual, or your performance is not necessarily the greatest, but can I see people there? They have
Mm.
curiosity. Do they have grit? Do they have the purpose? Well, and can I trust them?
Yes, indeed.
And if I can build on that trust, and I see that they're inquisitive enough to continue to challenge
Mm.
status quo, well, that performance we can work on. Those are things that are
Absolutely.
workable. But trust, curiosity, and grit, those are ingrained in people. And if you can't have that, then, well, it's going to be very difficult to drive performance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thinking about the industry now, what is the one myth about the payments industry that you would love to sort of blow up and say, actually, you might want to have a think about that. What's the one myth that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to take this from a consumer angle,
Yep.
uh, rather than an industry angle, because I think the industry will know this. But taking it from a consumer
Yeah,
angle,
that'd be
is
great.
that payments happen instantly. That's one myth that I believe everyone should really step back and think about. Because, yes, when I step up to the underground and I tap my
Yep.
card and it allows me to flow through the gates, or I go to a shop and I use my contactless, yes, I can take the goods immediately. But actually, if you stand back, a few steps and think about, well, what
Mm.
happens in that journey? It's at the simplest basic point. It's a four-way relationship between merchant, acquirer, payment systems, and banks, and as the issuer. And it's being able to have milliseconds of a payments network communicate across each other seamlessly. My funds go out of my bank instantly? No, they don't actually. But it effectively authorizes a payment to be taken from my bank, and the bank then releases that, and then the funds happen to go overnight. That's the traditional sense that happens. So are payments instant? No, but we are getting there, and
Mm.
I think that's where it's very interesting. But with that come also challenges of liability, and
Yes, indeed.
being able to create a framework in which I still feel protected as consumer when
Sure.
things go wrong. Um, and uh, and I think that's the trade-off that we are going to have to deal with as an industry as we evolve, is things happen or want to happen instantly, but I still want to be protected in that transaction as
Yeah.
consumer. Well, how is that going to work in reality? And in account to account and push payments, yes, well, we've now seen the mandatory reimbursement model that's come to life and
Mm.
it's working as expected. Obviously, we would want to see more, from a payment systems perspective, but it's working. So people feel protected, but people are still being scammed. And it's creating this instant gratification of having things now,
Mm.
making payments go now, but still wanting to be protected is a very interesting balance in which we're
Indeed.
going to see more evolution as this system grows. But the one myth is uh, payments happen instantly.
Fascinating, fascinating. It's so true, isn't it? And again, perhaps the industry in some ways has done such a good job there. The fact that at point of purchase, that it feels instant, and actually, if it's there milliseconds late, then it feels like, hey, there's something wrong here. But for me, the word there that hangs on trust. Our whole industry hangs on trust, as you say. Even a simple thing like buying a coffee, well, it looks like it's been authorized, but the money doesn't come out until later on. But that is, I'm trusting as a consumer, even though I don't know it. I'm trusting that my bank will settle later today, the merchant, and they will receive that for the goods that I've had. But that's built on trust. I'm allowed to walk away with my coffee, and I'm allowed to drink that, and consume it within 10 minutes, probably.
Absolutely. I think that word of trust is central to the payments ecosystem because it's money at the end of the day. Would you trust anyone with your money? No, you don't. And I think that's where you kind of look at it. Well, I trust my bank with my money, but do I really trust them to do the right thing? These are the things that trust is such a critical and core word to it.
Yeah,
But I, you're absolutely right. It is a system of trust, collaboration, and strong communication, but
indeed.
all through technical layers. Because if one layer were to break down,
Yeah.
it would cause a chain reaction, and this is where we see things like resiliency come into play. So, challenging your systems, your technology to ensure that they maintain rigidity, resilience, and sustainability. I think those are the kind of key things that will
Mm.
continue to play an important role in the way the ecosystem works. But it's fundamentally based on trust. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. So just reflecting again on your journey, what would you be saying to your 21-year-old self? Because it's you strike me as somebody who you can't help notice just how much you enjoy your role, your job, the passion for the industry and the consumers it serves and reducing friction. So what would you reflect on that 21-year-old self sort of graduating and then going on a career? What would you now say to them about what would your advice be to them?
So yeah, I love what we do. I'm a very passionate individual. I believe very strongly in purpose and giving back. Now, did I have the most easiest journey as a teenager? And I would say absolutely not. I've learned very, very early on in my life what true grit and hard work is, and I've got no other person to thank but my father for that. So as a 12-year-old kid wanting new basketball shoes for my new season, and him telling me, "So you want new basketball shoes then, son? Okay, well, you're working in the warehouse for the entire summer holidays, and that will earn you your basketball shoes." Well, that's where I learned the value
Mm.
of actually what money is, what true hard work and grit is, but also appreciating that
Mm.
what he was building was quite a phenomenal thing. And but looking at that kind of journey that moved me to university, that was anything but smooth. And what if I were to be able to advise my 21-year-old self is never lose the passion, never lose sight of where you want to go.
Yeah.
And not only lose sight of it, continue to work hard and always be kind, because the world will have a very funny way of repaying that kindness, but never ever lose sight of
Mm.
what you need to be. So do what you do.
Wonderful, wonderful. So this is the stage where I normally just try and bring about the most salient points that I thought would be, most salient for our audience. Do you mind if I share a few of those? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
I think the thing that sort of struck me, and I think the sort of common theme, we've had a few common themes here, but I think purpose, I think passion, as well as trust and curiosity, I think have really been the theme throughout everything we've talked about. We talked about having a purpose. I think for you, I think that feels very individual, but also as well having a purpose. If you want to lead, you almost to earn the right to lead, you need to say, we're heading in this direction and persuade people why that's valuable in the service of others. People are more likely to get behind something far more important and to positively impact people there. And again, across the globe, again, your recognition that localized currency and localized trust is localized, and how somebody wants to pay is how they want to pay, and based on trust, wherever that may well be throughout the world. And I love that the fact that you wanted to ultimately build the ultimate financial inclusion so that people feel included, well, not just feel included, but also, again, it allows all boats to rise. Because you mentioned the purple pound. Well, if that was nearly, over $500 million worth in the UK alone, well, that's spending power, that's significant spending power, which goes to merchants, which goes to acquirers, which goes to PSPs, etc., etc. So all boats get a chance to rise, just like any good business and any good ecosystem. But I think it was very interesting there what you're saying about being customer centric and recognizing that we have to keep moving. And the very basis of keeping moving was curiosity. And you always struck me as somebody who is very curious. And I love your line really there. So the time you stop being curious is you stop being human. And I think that's true. But we have to, that mindset and questioning is not good enough on its own. It needs to be followed up with action. It needs to be followed up with a resilience and and an adaptability, because it's not going to go right. Very unlikely to go right first time, and we
Correct.
have to stay the course. And I love how you say how you recruit as well, getting people who you can trust, people who, yes, have competence, of course, but who are curious, who want to improve, and ultimately are going to stay the course and actually be resilient. And I think the interesting one there for me as well is just about the industry, about how it looks instant, and um, and actually it's worth sort of peering behind the curtain there and just realizing what's actually going on. There's almost that swan that's clapping away behind it. But hey, look, consumer expectations are only rising on that front.
Yeah.
And I think then, coming to that sort of final part then about what you'd actually say to yourself, which is I got a sense from you there that having a purpose takes discovery, and it's not something that sort of instantly happens to us, whether
No,
it's well.
no, and indeed, it's the discovery of purpose happens through multiple steps of your experiences through life. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then in this thing as a father as well, for me, you're just talking about that value of the summer job, working in a warehouse equals getting the basketball shoes so you can go back in September and you can change the. But that's something that's very true for me. It's interesting for me on that front. My son, he wanted a car, and I said to him, we'll give you this amount towards the car. And he said, "Oh, but my car's worth a bit more than my sister's, and or a bit less. Do I still get?" I said, "Nope, you get the same amount." And but he was working and serving, and working in, and he's got a car. And he said to me, it was a really good moment actually when he paid for the car, or he paid for his proportion of the car, and it was a really learning experience to go, oh, hard work plus knowing what you want equals results. It's a really simple equation. So yes, so they were my takeaways from today. But obviously, I'd love to leave the last word with you.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful for such a great summary, Adrian. I couldn't have put it better myself. But it also comes down to, that sense of pride. Once you've
Mm,
earned that right, and you know that you've worked extraordinarily hard for something, and then have that purpose, and backed by that purpose, and you achieve the result you want, it
yes.
comes with a sense of pride where you can say, look, this is what we've really achieved. not only by myself, but together. And that allows you to continue to build upon very, very strong foundations. Obviously, you should never allow the pride to take center stage, or to create egocentricity, because egocentricity is an absolute killer in this space. But I would say kind of my last final words are, we're at a really, really exciting phase of growth in the payments sector. I think there's a lot more to come. There's a
Yep.
lot of challenges that we all have to overcome, but through a base of trust, strong collaboration, but also working together through very strong communication. And not only just as a sector, but working with regulators, government alike, we can actually really achieve something very, very wonderful. And then we would want to have that at a global sphere, so that cross-border payments can actually happen in a very easy manner with full traceability. So we're at a really, really exciting phase of the payment sector in the growth. But again, you want to do that with teams you can trust. And that's really where I would want to end this kind of point on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for such a hopeful as well as optimistic, yet really grounded um, way of looking at the industry and the opportunities it presents. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Adrian.